We're in the last session of the first day of Graylog Go, and I'm pleased to moderate a panel session with a number of our Graylog customers. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Mark Brooks. I am the customer officer here at Graylog, responsible for all things from post-sale customer success all the way through to customer support. I'm joined with a group of gentlemen that I'll introduce here in just a moment. But before we get into that, I do want to describe the expectations for this session, give you a little bit of introduction to what we're looking for value outcomes from this session, and then we'll get right into the introduction. So I'm really excited today to moderate. In the past, if you've attended Go sessions, you know that we've had a number of customer panels and we take feedback very seriously. One of the bits of feedback that came out of the last session was we want a more broad variety of use cases, as well as a broad variety of size of customer. We're honored today to have not just one of our largest customers, but also a number of mid-market customers that do a lot of great things with Graylog. And we'll walk through that in just a second. This session specifically is designed as, it's not a fluff piece, it's not a sales piece. It's designed as real world experience and how to get, whether you're an open source user or a paying commercial customer, but how to get value out of Graylog, where you focus your time and attention from users that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. So let me walk you through some introduction. The first company that's represented is Ecom21. On the line with us is Christoph Kirchner. Christoph is an IT security engineer, has been with Ecom for over 20 years, has been a user of Graylog since the 2.x release. And I think he and Matt are pretty neck and neck in regards to the oldest user. Rick, I know you've got some long-standing usage as well. Ecom21 is the largest municipal services company in Hessen, Germany, and they're providing services for a whole bunch of municipal challenges. Second customer, Hub Customer Central, is a part of Hub International. They're the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, and they own two brokerages, Hub Smart Coverage and Hub Insurance Hunter. We're joined by Rick Chisolm. Rick is the IT security manager, director, all things that are associated with making sure that their environment is secure. Has been in technology for over 15 years. And when he's not collecting logs, he likes to mountain bike and spend time with his kids, just like I do, which I love. Third customer, Westchester County of New York State. In addition to financial services, in addition to insurance and brokerage, we've also brought in a gov customer. All of the things that the county government would go through in leveraging Graylog and looking for similar things that we look for in other industries. But Westchester is in the southeastern portion of the U.S. state of New York. It's bordering the Long Island Sound and the Hudson River. And it is the seventh most populous county in the state of New York, which it is extremely a large and populous state, as everybody in the States knows. And we're joined by Chris Candreva. Chris is a Linux engineer, has over 30 years along with me with tech experience, and has been with the county for over 9 years, or almost 9 years, excuse me. And then finally, we've got Fairway Independent Mortgage Company, also in the financial industry. Fairway it's a very longstanding and old mortgage organization since 1996. They have over 10,000 employees. They have almost 350 locations nationwide in the state. Their focus is on customer success. They've got some great awards and some other things. We're joined by Matt Rachal. Matt is the manager of network engineering at Fairway, has over 15 years of experience. And as you probably saw in some of the bio stuff, was a previous Go panel, customer panel participant in our first Go a couple of years ago. Want to start by thanking these gentlemen for joining us, and we're going to jump right into questions. So I thought we would start with use cases. Many of our customers, as they're trying to define how they're going to use logging, whether it's a security practice, an operational or application practice. What's your primary use case for logs? Rick, why don't we start with you? How are you using logs today in your business?
Primary use case was always business driven. They wanted the compliance side of things. You had to keep the year of logs to be compliant. That was the main driver. even back in the on-prem open source version and continued on to the cloud version. However, once you have the logs, it just opens up so many doors for you. As a security minded person, you're looking for problems or threat hunting, or you already have some sort of incident going, you can go straight to the logs, type in a query and start down that rabbit hole. Compliance driven, but it just allows you to do so many more things.
Perfect. Christoph, you're similar in your security use case. How is Graylog being leveraged today at Ecom?
It's also compliance driven, but our main use case is threat hunting. So we are using Graylog mostly as a SIEM. We collect all security relevant logs from our different log sources, from network components, operating system, authentication logs, application logs, and so on. And we used a bunch of self-developed Python scripts to enrich our log data to ensure that we are able to detect the attacks in a better way, where we can do better enrichment. Also, we have the option to respond when we detect an attack automatically. We have Python script for this to block IP addresses at the firewalls and so on.
So you're actually extending it into a SOAR type
Yeah.
automation outcome. That's fantastic. I love that. We're going to come back to that as we get to some of the features and functions. Matt, your use case is all over the place, but you've spent a lot of time with developers and applications and actually pulling in like developer and application logs is what I was.
Correct. Yeah. So Graylog started for us, like the other gentleman mentioned, around compliance, right? Keeping logs for X amount of time to check that box. And then you have all this data coming in, and all of a sudden now you have this great avenue to start doing better troubleshooting. We really start trying to use it for our developers. I mean, initially, they were just writing logs to a text file on a server, and then we'd have to give them file share access to read logs. None of that. Let's thin things out a little bit. You don't need access to the boxes, just go here in Graylog, you can see it. So it made it invaluable for them when troubleshooting their stuff, which is really cool.
Excellent. Love it. Chris, you had a great comment when we discussed this earlier. You said it, and I'm paraphrasing because I know this isn't exactly how you said it, but if you know the question to ask, we'll find it in Graylog. You've done some pretty interesting things with application visibility. You were describing to me one of the other services that you guys are running that wasn't giving you rack temp in your server room. Tell me how you're using Graylog today at the county.
It's funny because when it started, it was a way to not have to go to each machine and grab. And it has grown and grown. And anytime someone comes up with, gee, I wish we could do this, I'm like, I think I can do that in Graylog. We had an APC camera system that the people were in love with because, these cameras also do temperature. I'm like, seems silly to have your security cameras tied to temperature. Those aren't exactly. And wait a minute, every server room is full of temperature sensors and so it was, well, if we just get the inlet temp, hey, look, we can tell you the temperature of every rack at the top, the bottom, the middle. So yeah, it's hard to say a primary use case because it just started out being log aggregation is a good idea. Let's do it. And it has ended up being any question someone asks, let's see what we can do. In coming together for this, I had almost forgotten being government. When you said Westchester is large, it is. We have county police, we have EMS, we have a 911 desk. So there's one of the things we have is a whole radio department that handles going over from, and I'm not a radio person, but switching over from old analog to what's called P25 digital. And they're doing this whole thing. They've got all these little Raspberry Pi based radio monitors. And there's a vendor and they said, hey, they're just asking us, do we have a log aggregator? I'm like, yes, we do.
Yes, we did.
So the radio people are all hams. And so they were the easiest people to teach. Okay. And here's your radio team. Here's your Graylog. Here's your stream and your index. Go have fun. And every once in a while I get a bunch of alerts and I go, oh, sorry, I set that up wrong. And so they're off monitoring their own radio equipment, having a blast. And I got to admit, I'm not even sure what they're doing. That's the point, is that I could hand this off to them to monitor their equipment and I don't have to worry about it, except every once in a while, tell them, hey, we just did an update. There's a new feature you might need. Interesting.
Very, very nice. I like the diversity. I think much of our customer base experiences some form of each of the segments of use cases as you describe them. Let's go back to the beginning and from open source days, or as you've converted into the commercial Graylog versions. And by the way, just to review, we've got security users, as you heard in the responses. We have our enterprise operations users. Rick is actually a cloud user, so he leverages our hosted SaaS version of Graylog security in the cloud. And so when we get to some of these questions, especially around how do you manage and keep up with the changes and the releases, et cetera, communicating to your teams that are using Graylog on a day-to-day basis, what the latest and greatest is. Rick's got a little bit easier job, but he's also still maintaining an on-prem environment as well. So we'll get to that in just a second. But let's go back to the beginning. We've got a lot of open source experience. When you guys were looking for and evaluating whether it was SIEM, security management, compliance management, just general centralized log management, what were the factors that led to a decision to move forward with Graylog? Christoph, let's start with you.
In the beginning, we looked at many solutions that were available on the market. And in the end, there was three main factors why we choose Graylog. Biggest issue is user acceptance. In my team, we work with, most of them are former system administrators. And from an admin's point of view, Graylog feels just right. Like Chris said, if you do a grep on the Linux system, or you can search in Graylog, the admin can do both. And he can do his work in Graylog much faster as if he had to go to the system, to the next system, to the next system, and so on. And this was a process we don't have with any other solution at this time. The second factor was no cloud solution. We have an on-premise installation of Graylog. The third factor is pricing. We are Graylog customers since 2017, Graylog 2. something, I think 2 or 3. And in this time, Graylog was open source. So it is a bit unfair with enterprise themes. It was the right decision at this point. And to be honest, the fact that Graylog had its roots in Hamburg, Germany also played a role for us.
I was going to mention that. Yeah. So roots in Hamburg, that I'm sure were right in your backyard, but Germany specifically deals with the most restrictive when it comes to GDPR and data privacy and data location. And so I totally understand having an on-prem solution versus just a cloud service. That's fantastic. Rick, how about you? You've been using Graylog for a while. You had it running in your environment. You had a decision to make to move. What was the original to move to cloud? Let me finish that thought. What was the original reason why you guys deployed Graylog at home?
We did look at a lot of things for sure. And we probably weren't even hub at the time. So we had looked at your logarithms and your sumos and your Splunks. And for one reason or another, we even deployed ELSA for a while, but it just could not handle the volume. And we didn't have, at the time, we did not have the budget. So I was always looking for something that would fit the bill without having to make a big spend. We had 2 data centers. We always had equipment getting decommissioned. So I found Graylog, stumbled upon it online, started reading through the deployment guide sort of thing. It didn't take, more than a few days to get this thing really up and running. Started just feeding random stuff into it, and it was fast. It was stable. It did everything one of these things should do. It just took off from there. Once we saw that the upgrade from ELSA, because ELSA wasn't that great, the Graylog thing, people were suspicious at first, and then it doesn't crash. It gives you an answer right away. So it just worked its way into our infrastructure as the go-to logging solution. And every year budget comes up, and can we pay for the commercial version? Maybe. Eventually it became a must. Like audits, compliance audits would come along, and they would always ask, do you have a logging solution? Are you logging for a year? And we're answering, yeah.
Look over
But-
here. Yeah.
Yeah, but the archiving side, The 90 days of hot, I think we stretched it past that because we had such a big cluster. We could push past 90 days hot, but we still didn't have long-term our solution on the open source version. We tried to figure out how to do that, but it just wasn't feasible. We finally said, okay, let's get the budget for this. Let's make a push. And the version is out there. It's got everything built right in, and we can just uplift everything out. And that's taken care of. That's
I love it. I love it. Chris, how about you? So you've been with the county for a while. You guys have had a number of tools. Still today, have a number of tools in your tool belt. What was the original decision to use Graylog?
When I joined, my predecessor was using Splunk for the Unix machines. And every time the salesman came, the price was going up, and he got fed up and said, why don't you go look and see what else is out there? I saw this thing, Graylog. And I started looking, and I looked at what it would take to stand up just a plain old Elk stack and Graylog. And I'm like, all right, this looks easy. And I like the sidecars, which again, we're talking about 2017. I actually went back to the server, which is still running from 2017. It's a one server box with both Elastic or now open and Graylog on it. And it's still going. It was an absurdly overpriced machine because it was coming off another big project. Luckily, that's what it came down to. And it is open source. And I know that time it was like, good, we can cut that budget to nothing. And it's been growing. And it went from what's a nice to have to, gee, we're dependent on it. And the biggest reason I initially wanted to go to the paid version was for teams, because as I said, with radio, we have lots of developers, we have radio, we have a network group. And it was like, I wanted to be able to segment and give each person access. And the easiest way was to do AD integration on the teams. So I started looking at that, and I had the director above me was like, sometimes we really could use auditing. Like the CIO wanted to be able to say, hey, can we get a list of all accounts created in AD in the last year and who did it? We have somebody that's taking the AD logs, but they couldn't do it. I'm like, let's see, we did have a couple of DCs logging. I can do it for them. I was like, okay, so now all the DCs were going in, and all of a sudden things are getting bigger and bigger. And that's when we got the Pulse security platform. I'll admit, I did not understand the scope of what the security portion does. And I'm still learning because I'm a Linux guy. Every once in a while, it's going to be, again, as I said before, gee, it would be nice to have this. I'm like, I think we already have that. We're already paying for that somewhere. And up comes a report, and it's, oh, gee, I didn't know we had this. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a little past why originally, but originally it was 2017, and it was the easiest thing to replace Splunk with. And it's just been growing since.
I love it. And I appreciate the competitive analysis as well. That's extremely helpful for our open users. Matt, let's switch over to you. You actually introduced Graylog to Fairway a couple of years ago, like a year and a half ago, 6 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And you're also a 2.x open user, so you've been using Graylog for a long time. What was the precipice for you bringing Graylog into Fairway?
So the main driver was the auditing and price. There was some compliance thing that we had to check a box saying that we had to have that. We looked at all the usual suspects, and at the time, just everything else was just way too expensive. And I've been a customer so long, we're actually charging per node versus ingestion amount. So the price was just perfect. So that check that box, we're absolutely good. We had auditing stored on the NFS share, and it's all good. Other thing I really like, which made the move to pricing per ingestion, was I really like pipelines. So one thing that's really slick is I can drop stuff I don't care about. I can send like everything there and then drop what I don't care about, and it technically doesn't count towards the ingestion amount. Every blue moon will be like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z. I'm like, oh, it's already going there. I'm just dropping it. So it's easy to allow it, add it back, do my filtering, and then boom, it's right there. So that's really slick. And just transforming the data. It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, data transform. And we'll come back to the data transformation side and the pipeline rules, because it's interesting. Everybody mentioned pipeline rules as one of the greatest features in Graylog.
Yeah.
And so we'll come back to that. Let's switch slightly to the decision to move from the introduction to how do you get to the commercial how did you end up arriving at a commercial relationship with Graylog? And so, Rick, I know you mentioned this in your answer for the evaluation side, but it was timing and the cloud version and the old version that you were running versus upgrading manually. Anything else that went into a decision to move to the cloud for Graylog?
We're at a kind of a fork in the road sort of thing, with the upgrade looking like it was going to be rather burdensome and also a bit of a time sink. So we had to make a decision on how to proceed. And, there's a lot of movement to the cloud already in our organization. It's a very popular thing to do right now. The Graylog cloud solution looked good. It checked the box, especially with the archiving ability, and the price seemed fair. It had the right amount of storage per day, or our logs per day. Once we looked at all the numbers, we got the green light and just proceeded to move it to the cloud.
And you're still maintaining an on-prem deployment as well.
Yeah, it was because it was already still there. What I ended up doing is shrinking the nodes down to a single device that was probably the most powerful box out of the three. And what we mostly do with that one is, when we have some stuff that's particularly noisy, but maybe not completely without value, we'll send it to that box instead. We'll just use like NX log or whatever to send different things to different locations. Some go through the forwarders up to the cloud, and other stuff we just keep on-prem. We can track it over time and not worry too much about it.
Awesome.
So the on-prem one still ticks away. It doesn't
Still
get
ticking away?
Yeah, it doesn't get a lot of care, and it just keeps running.
I understand. I've seen a little bit of that, especially with the 2017 box that's sitting in the corner over at Westchester. Hey, Christoph, you had an interesting response to this. Your initial, and I'm going to paraphrase and I'll let you add some commentary to it. Your original move to the commercial version of the Graylog product was to ensure viability of future releases for Graylog as an organization. Is that appropriate?
That's true. It's because I loved Graylog from the beginning. It made my job so much easier. And I have seen some great open source solutions in the past that all gave up a few years because of lack of resources. And back in 2017 or 18, I don't remember exactly, the easiest way for us to support Graylog on this early stage was to become an enterprise customer. And we hope on this way we can ensure the product availability for the future. And I talked to my boss and he said yes. And so I think since 2018 or something like that,
18,
we are
yeah.
enterprise customer, and our license is still growing. Today, I can say it was the right decision.
And that was going to be my follow-up to this question was, and this is for everybody, we'll go around. So obviously open is a limited feature set. We have much more features and capabilities in our commercial version and our cloud version. We're announcing here at Go the Graylog 6.1 release, which has a whole bunch of new data routing capabilities, data tiering that came out in 6.0. Let me ask you very frankly, are you guys getting value out of the commercial relationship with Graylog above what you were seeing in the open source version? Christoph, let's start with you.
I think for sure.
For sure. Enough features and functions and capabilities above and beyond just making sure that Graylog is viable as an organization and we can keep releasing software.
Yeah.
Okay. Matt, how about you? Are you getting value out of Graylog? I hope so.
Yeah. Yes. Also, I'm one of those crazy home users that like runs Graylog at home, because we all have home labs, I assume. And it's really nice because I've got 2 installations at work where I can test, but I also test it at home too, where I can really be on the cutting edge. I get to see both sides. And oh, this is a cool thing that I've upgraded. Hopefully we'll get it at work in the next 6 months when I finally get around to upgrading. So, it's really cool. So I think when LDAP came in version 4, technically it didn't come to open source, but they expounded it so much more.
Yeah.
The features just keep improving. So absolutely.
I appreciate that. Chris, how about you?
Definitely. In fact, it got to the point of I had to go back after we talked and say, what am I using that's enterprise and not in open source at this point? And we had talked about it, and since then I've actually set it up using TCP syslog to take all our web servers, aggregate into Graylog, which then normalizes it all and shoves it to Matomo, which, if people don't know, it's a open source replacement for Google Analytics. That's now a pipeline that I'm pretty much dependent on. Just the couple times I've had questions, being able to get it, like, support's been really fast and helpful.
Okay, so I own that. Let's not over embellish on support. No, I appreciate that very much. Rick, how about you? Value for the cloud and continuing to manage the on-prem, is it appropriate for your spend?
Absolutely. It's great value as far as I can tell. And, we brought on a new analyst not too long ago. He's coming from a QRadar background, and it's taken him no time to come up to speed in Graylog, and he's already done some amazing stuff on the cloud side. It just keeps getting better, really.
Awesome. I appreciate the pivot there for just a moment. Let's talk about features. So there are a whole bunch of features, and depending on which version of Graylog you're on, you're going to have a limited set versus we're constantly releasing new features in every major release. We've talked a lot about pipeline rules. We've mentioned Sidecar a couple of times on this call from previous conversations, that archiving is a big component. What's the feature? What is the thing that you guys use every day that you in Graylog that you can't live without? Mine's coffee. So I have my coffee that I can't live without every day. But specific to Graylog, Matt, what's the feature?
The feature would be probably alerting. It's one of the things I didn't realize it was going to be amazing. We use SolarWinds for all the network and server monitoring. But some stuff, it's literally in the logs. The developer will write error, something broke, and there's no way to get an SNMP. I guess you could write it in there, but it's easier if they just send their logs there. I can create alerting rules, and then there's integration with PagerDuty, one of the plugins, to send, and that one we rely on heavily. So that, coupled with data transformation, stuff like using MindMets, whatever that thing is, to inject IP addresses for different locations, all the transformations, and then getting alerting, that's pretty slick, especially the stuff that's really hard to alert on.
That's awesome. Chris, you've got a common theme there with pipeline rules. I know that you're constantly editing, updating pipeline rules. Is that your feature?
Pipeline would be a big one. We've got such a diverse infrastructure that there's a lot of custom normalization, parsing. A lot of our development is in Java and IBM WAS. So took a good couple of weeks to sit down and really parse out the WAS log so that the developers could get something useful out of it, turning a multi-line stack trace into one message. That seems like it would be obvious and easy, but no two logs had the same format. We got that normalized. A really simple one is the parameterized search, which lets you setting up something that, hey, you want to here, just put a username into this field. You don't have to create the whole search every time. That's been incredibly helpful. The other thing, in terms of notifications, we use Cisco and WebEx. So I actually ended up taking their demo bot. I have a JavaScript bot that sits there, and I use the HTTP notifier to send messages to it, and that goes into a WebEx team channel. And you can pick which channel, so it goes in and notifies people to our WebEx. With a little bit of coding, there's a lot of customization you can do.
One of the things that we pride ourselves on, and I see in our customer base every day, is flexibility. And I think you guys have all touched on it in some form or capacity, but the ability to take transformed data, manipulate it into other systems or notifications, or however, whether it's a plugin that comes from Graylog or something that you guys code yourselves. Flexibility is what we rely on in order to ensure that future value within our customer organizations.
I don't know if you called it
go ahead.
feature, but the fact that you have that, I can't think of the name, the GL normalization.
The Graylog
So
information model. Yep.
yeah, that is like incredibly useful once you have something, because I alluded before, you can take Nginx, Apache, IIS logs that are totally disparate, and WAS, which is Apache 2.2 really running on Windows, with 4 different formats, massage it into one thing. And if someone wants to look at websites, they can look at websites and not have to worry about, is this Nginx? Who cares about the technology? It's a website. I want to know what's happening. Let somebody else worry about what the program was underneath. I want to know, is it working or not?
Content packs, Illuminate packs follow our Graylog information model. And we were a little short-sighted when we released Illuminate and didn't put the information model into the open source deployment. And so what we've seen as customers have converted, and some of you guys mentioned this in previous conversations, was a transition in order to take whatever model and normalization policies that you had in place for your organization and transition them into the GEM. In 6.1, we're actually releasing an Illuminate pack for open. And it basically exposes GEM within the open deployment in order for users to be able to leverage that information model and beyond. They can still use and today you can use your own model if you'd like, your own normalization schema, but putting GEM into open was a big eye opener for us in the 6.1 release. Rick, you've talked about in previous conversations, you've talked about threat hunting. You talked a lot about sidecar and NX logs. What NX log is a agent source? What's your feature? What is the thing for Hub?
Yeah, pipelines have been well covered. It is like the killer app hidden within the Graylog, but we do make use of sidecars, and they are fantastic little utility to have, be able to change configs on remote devices and customize and have different kind of groups for, let's say, web servers, and one for DCs and one for something else. And just as you add systems, you just assign them those labels and you get the right configs, and the logs just start rolling in. It's very handy.
Especially for a cloud deployment where you don't have,
Yes.
when you're working with a forwarder that's actually consolidating and compressing those logs. I can see where agent policy and sidecar manipulation would be extremely valuable for that. I appreciate that. Christoph, we talked about your security practice and use of Graylog at Econ 21. You guys are an extensive user of Sigma rules. Is that your feature?
I think we have 2 features.
Oh, good. Okay.
On the one hand, we have Sigma rules, that's true. On the other hand, alerting. Because we use alerting to put the critical alerts into our incident response system. We don't handle them in Graylog. We have another system for this. And to respond automatically to attacks. It's a very great feature. And Sigma rules was introduced in 5 dot something, I think.
Yep.
5.2. And it was a game changer. In the past, we had more than 400 self-written event definitions in Graylog. And it was really hard to do the day-to-day task to 400 rules. But now we have our own repository, we have a GitLab infrastructure where we can write our own rules. We have rules from the public source, we have commercial rules, and we have some processes how we get these rules into production. Because when you look to the Sigma headquarter, for example, there are tons of good rules, but when you look into the rule, the field names don't match every time with the field names you have in your production environment or with the Graylog schema. So there are some processes that we have to take a look into every rule before going to production, make sure that we get the correct logs to detect the things and a few other things. And at the end of the day, we have 220, 230 Sigma rules in production today. And I think at the middle of the next year, we have something around 500.
Yeah, Sigma rules and integration has obviously there's work in order to integrate them, and it sounds like you've got a pretty solid process to make sure that they're following the information model that you have deployed, all of those things. But it gives you visibility at a security detection layer that writing and managing your own rules can be challenging at best. I did, after our conversation, go and check and see how many customers are running more than 200 Sigma rules. And you're at the top. You're in the top 10. You're not the top, which is interesting, especially considering the policy and the practice that you've built around that. But Sigma rules, we're seeing significant uptick of interest in the customer base in order to leverage that technology. That's fantastic. I appreciate your answers. Let's jump to managing the environment. So a number one question that we get, especially with new customers coming on board, whether they're open users or commercial customers, is what does it take to keep this thing up and running? Rick, you got the easy answer in the form of cloud is maintained with latest version, availability of Illuminate content, et cetera, on your behalf. But that doesn't mean you don't have some infrastructure responsibilities. You mentioned Sidecar and managing the endpoints and the data collection. What else do you do on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly basis that's care and feeding for the Graylog environment?
We don't really do a lot. That was one of the bonuses of moving it to the cloud for sure. All the TDM, we'll just ignore the other box that I have running of keeping something on premise running. We don't deal with the sidecars. They don't require that much upkeep either, nor does the NX log agents. Maybe once a quarter, maybe twice a year, we'll have to deal with NX log updates or something like that. And even that's not that burdensome, really. The sidecars, we've updated a few times, unless there's something really egregiously wrong with them. We might even be a little reluctant to update them immediately. If they're still running, we might let it go. So if there's no security advisory on them, we'll let them just keep doing their job.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll switch over to Chris, because I'm sure that 2017 deployment that's still running is indicative of all of the time that you spend, downtime that you spend around. How do you manage Graylog on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly basis?
So I say it's a 2017 box. It's been upgraded from RHEL 7 to 8 to 9. And being in RHEL land, all the patching is done with Satellite. Satellite's a patch manager, deployment server for those who don't know Red Hat. Everything just is automatic. For Graylog and OpenSearch, I have a test deployment at home that I have 2 gig or whatever the 2-level free enterprise.
Yep.
And then when I'm sure it's running, DNF-Y and just kind of works. The same thing with I have it locked to an Elastic 7 repository for the sidecar things and the forwarders. And they just, when a new version comes out, they update with the qual run and the production, and it stages out for the sidecars. But knock on wood, just doing that, the server has always updated very nicely. Aside from the Elastic to OpenSearch, which that bit me in there only because when I did the 7 to 8 update, it killed out my don't update Elasticsearch rule, and I went past the level, and that was not fun to recover things. But other than that one mistake, it's just been relatively easy. And the fact that you guys set up the package so that it doesn't restart, you have to actually restart it yourself. It has not been difficult. I'm sure we will have to move to a cluster sooner rather than later. And I'm sure a cluster will be more difficult and all of that.
Yeah.
But for a 1-node box, it's been pretty easy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Not a 1-node box, pretty extensive deployment. Matt, you've moved from Puppet to Docker to, I don't even know what the latest is in regards to your environment management and deployment, continuous deployment strategy. Talk to me about your daily, weekly, monthly maintenance requirements for your Graylog environment.
Yeah, it started off a little painful, but it's good now. So
Good.
uh, initially, like I over-engineered the thing. There's 3 Graylog boxes, or 6 Elastic boxes, 3 MongoDBs. I wanted all the redundancy, and I just manually installed it. We were on Rail as well. I think I had it on 7 at the time. But there's a lot of nuances if you haven't worked with Elasticsearch before. Getting the heap size just right, getting the settings dialed in. So it was a lot of support tickets initially. And then once I got that in place, I'm like, oh, this is great. Let me see if I can automate it. That's when I put it in Puppet to do that. That made it easier. And then we had to go to Rail 8 as well. Chris, I guess you didn't have to go through this, but I did. Man, it was painful because you had to reinstall it, do all the things. And that's when I switched it over to Docker. So I could just do a Docker pull and then easy peasy. And since going to that, now it's been a lot easier. I still have it in Puppet to do the Docker compose file for me, but it makes it so much easier because everything's packaged. I know it's going to work. I can test it in the dev environment, do it in production. And since then, it's been rock solid. Now I don't have to touch it.
That's awesome. One of our investments in our open platform is ultimately we have tens of thousands. I won't give a specific number here because marketing will yell at me, but we have tens of thousands of open deployments, and they give us test and QA like nobody's business for deployment, for management, maintenance. And so open community is great for Graylog in making sure that we get to the stability and the scale components that we've all discussed here on this call. Christoph, your environment, the largest of everybody on this call, we're well over a terabyte a day of log messages. What's that maintenance look like? That's a little bit larger than everything else that we've discussed here.
Yeah. So we have automated the most things with Ansible. So we have today 3 different stages. We have a testing stage, which get all the operating system updates, Graylog updates, OpenSearch updates, and so on every night. And when something fails, build new. It's the easy way.
Shoot it and build new. Yep.
Yeah. And so we can test new functions, can see if there's a problem with some operating system updates or something else, MongoDB updates, and so on. We have a second stage for development. This stage have nearly the same operation system patch level as in production, and the same Graylog version as in production, or a bit newer. Then we try to upgrade our production environment. And so on development, we do the final update tests for productions and so on. And also when we try to develop new stuff or have to troubleshooting something in Graylog, we do this in development without touching our production environment. And only when all flags are green, when we build something new, then it goes from development to production. And then we have stage 3, our production stage for the day-to-day task in Graylog, where the important data is and so on. And we have several Kafka clusters in front of Graylog. So we have no problem with performing maintenance tasks and losing log messages. And we are able to cache the logs for a certain number of days in the Kafka clusters. So we are able to go home at a Friday, and when Monday there's a problem with Graylog, so we have the logs, we will fix it, and the logs will still go into the system.
Multiple layers of redundancy.
Yeah. And for that, we split Graylog for ourselves into 3 different parts. We have the master nodes, one part. We have web front ends in production. These are 3 servers. And we have the worker nodes. which are additional 6 servers. And so when can we do rolling upgrades without hitting availability? And I think the last 4 or 5 years, there was no problem to work in this style.
That should be like a plaque on the wall. No injuries since Bob left 5 years ago. I like that a lot.
And time, I think we need 2 to 4 hours per month for keeping Graylog up and running, because we have to check the updates and a little bit of testing when new features coming into Graylog and so on. So there is a little bit to do.
How about anything that you have experienced that's a shortcoming? Things that have been, I described it in previous meetings as yell events. When have you called and yelled at somebody at Graylog about an issue that you've had or a shortcoming in the product, something didn't work the way you expected? Anything off the top of your mind, issues in your Graylog deployment, your use, your users, etc.?
We have one issue when we do the migration from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch. That was the only big issue since 2017.
That's only one. Chris, how about you? Issues?
Yeah, I took some notes. So the one issue I had was that Illuminate things can be a little opaque to extend. That's gotten better, and I may be in my mind back a few versions. It took a bit. Some of them are, as we discussed, some of them are like tied to specific versions for what seems like no reason. Like the Nginx dashboard is Nginx when it doesn't have to be. I normalized all my logs, and the Nginx dashboard, once I took off that limit, showed them perfectly well. The one other thing is finding out which stream is taking up your allotment. If one of your servers tends to go nuts and is like, oh my God, I went from 10 gig to 100 gig overnight. Where the hell is it going? I remember talking to someone in support and we solved the problem, but I can't for the life of me remember what the field is if I wanted to do that search. And that really shouldn't be hidden. That should be on a menu.
Right.
Where is all
You're
my
right.
bandwidth going? Please tell me. That should be a fairly obvious thing to. That's how minute my problems are. We're talking that specific.
I love it. I appreciate that. Matt, you've got something a little similar in the form of not necessarily which stream is taking your logs, but which developer is turned on verbose logging on their applications, which then gives you log floods, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, every blue moon, they'll test a new feature and they'll turn on trace logging and it will blow up. And I have no idea where it goes. And what Chris was saying, finding that can be a challenge. The other thing, and I believe this is fixed, but I'm not sure. I think it's fixed in version 6. But when you have the enterprise version, you can only go over your ingestion limit once a day.
A number of times, yeah.
Yes. But the first time you go over, you don't, it's hard to see where it is. I believe in version 6, there is an actual log rule for it. I haven't gotten 6 yet, so I can't see it.
Yes.
But if you go over 5 violations, your enterprise feature stop, of course, that makes sense. And if enterprise feature stop, archiving stops. And if archiving stops, then your journaling will fill up. And if journaling fills up, the log stops.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, support is pretty good. They usually catch it, even sometimes before I do, which is pretty amazing. But I'm going to get to version 6 so I can mitigate that, put an alert and then get notified.
Second or third time is the charge. Yeah. give you a little bit of a heads up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Rick, you've had some timestamp things that we've been back and forth on. What's your yelling moment? What challenges have you seen with Graylog over your years?
Yeah. As far as cloud, there's the timestamp oddness that we're still trying to troubleshoot where it gets confused over whether it's a timestamp or not. And the only other real thing I've run into is with the on-prem cluster, because it was so overbuilt, you could search and you could say, if something happened 5 years ago, go find it. And you have 2 sips of coffee and it tells you, oh, this is what you're looking for. if I try some of that on the cloud, it will spool a bit, and then it'll say there's a heap error or something, like you've asked for way too much. But sometimes you can just reword your query or change a few parameters,
narrow parameter.
and you get what you're looking for. So I don't really have a lot of reasons to yell.
I appreciate that. I think I'm of the age that I don't like to yell anymore.
Yeah.
So that's extremely beneficial. How, let me ask this. Somebody that's starting out new with Graylog, what would be one of the biggest lessons that you've learned over your time leveraging users, features, functions? What would be something that you would recommend that a new Graylog user customer would pay attention to? Chris, let's start with you.
Take your time. Parsing is important. And when you're developing rules, set up test indices that you can keep just deleting when something doesn't work, so that you're not dealing with bad fields or you made a mistake. Or it's very easy. You can even take a snapshot log and keep loading the same one over and over again, because I guess your first thought is, let me just see what this works. And then it fails and you're messing, and it may seem obvious, don't mess with production, but your first thought is there isn't an obvious way to do it. Take a test log for that you're going to process over and over again. I don't know how you do that with Windows events, but that's a Windows problem. I think I did come up with a way. I can't remember how I did it. And so you're always processing thing to a test index, and this way you can keep wiping it out and have something that looks the same. But yeah, start out with the GIM format initially. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble down the line, and have a plan of what it's going to be. Because once you've got a good layout, the searching becomes so much easier.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Christoph, what do you got? What would you recommend?
I would recommend ask for help when you need it. The support from Graylog is outstanding, and the community is also very helpful. And then, as Chris said, take your time. Know your logs and take the time to normalize your logs and use Illuminate whenever possible. It makes life so much easier. And think about your use cases. What kind of logs do you need to implement your use cases? Don't put all logs in the box and then take a look, oh, what can I do? Think before you put the logs into the box.
I love it. Chris's comment that I mentioned earlier, if you know the question, we'll find it in Graylog. There was a little piece in between that was the first thing you got to check is if we're getting the logs for that question. And if we're not getting the logs, then you absolutely got to go get the logs first. But then Graylog can help you answer your questions. I love those things tying together. Matt, recommendations for new users.
Ooh, I echo their sentiment. Take your time, read the manual, just read it, and because that will lead to better design, so you don't make mistakes. Because you mentioned like field names, I ran that issue. Technically, a certain amount of indices can only hold 1,000 field names, and it's case sensitive. But if you design it properly and you're using it for certain applications, and you have enough indices, and you overcome some of those things. So just take your time, parse slow, make sure it's going to the right stream. Just, parse your data and then just take it one at a time. So just
You mentioned Illuminate in the previous conversation where it was duplicating data and we had to turn it off, and because in that particular release, everything was black box.
and in version 3, because it used to be really painful to implement. It was like a separate package you had to install. But now it's a lot easier. Now it's not duplicating. But yeah, those are things. Just take your time.
Take your time.
Yeah.
I love it. Rick, what do you think? Last thoughts?
Yeah, I would say if you're building on-prem and you're new to the space, be mindful that sometimes Mongo and Elastic will install in insecure configurations, and you're going to want to lock those things down. Your Graylog can actually be a treasure trove to a bad actor.
That is an excellent point, especially from our resident security panelists. One of the things that we've added in the 6.1 release is called Data Node, and it allows for an automatic setup of those security policies, key exchange, all of the good stuff, certificates, etc., in order to lock down OpenSearch and Mongo. Very great advice. I also own documentation of all things, and that was one of the things we spent a lot of time in the last 18 months of documenting how to secure, especially production environments where you might have sensitive data. All production environments have sensitive data, but then when you're dealing with things like GDPR and regional challenges for compliance, flexibility is key. So I love all of the answers. I appreciate that very much. That is the session for today. So for all the Graylog family outside of this session, we want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation through the day. This ends day one. We are going to kick off tomorrow morning with new sessions. I want to personally thank all of the panelists that have joined us today. I hope this has been insightful and helpful for how you can leverage Graylog if you're not a Graylog user, or how you might get more value out of Graylog if you're a longstanding Graylog user. So with that, I'm going to bid everyone farewell. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this panel. And you guys have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.